Welcome csc103 class to 9b. This will be kind of part 2 of the 9a, and we could use pretty much the same code, so we could reuse some of this. So if you find this confusing on the instructions of what to do with some of the code, hopefully the video will help out a little bit if you're not doing this in class. Now what I'm going to do first, after I saved my 9a, I can fork this. And you can't just change the name and make a duplicate. You have to click this here and fork it, and it kind of makes a duplicate. Then I'll change the name of the duplicate right away. And what I'll do is I'll call it 9b, and I'll put fields in the name because it actually involves using fields, and everything else I'll leave the same. So I'll just save that. So this should be a new version thanks to forking it first and then saving it with a new name. And like I said, I'm going to use a lot of the same code, including the JavaScript and including some of the CSS. So I'll just put variable example fields, because we're going to use fields, so I'll put that up here. So what we can do here is enter your name in a field to display your name, or whatever you put in there. You put a period here, and we're not even putting click the button to display name. Hopefully people should know to click the button to do that. But we're going to put fields here, and we don't have fields right now, and that's going to help them so we don't have to use this code down here to do it. So I'm going to put two fields, and what we're going to do before the button is we're going to put two fields, and we're going to do input. This is like a form field, and we're going to do type equals text, because that's the type of form field, and it'll have a quote around it. So it's input type equals text, and there it is. You can see it. It's kind of small, and I'm going to just do a space, and I'm going to put first. I'm going to type in first, and then I'm going to put a paragraph. So it creates a new paragraph below it. And then what I'll do is I'll highlight this and copy it again, because there's no need to type it again. And this one, I'll put a label on it that says last. And by label, I just mean it shows up afterwards here. And again, to make this a little bigger, what we could do is we could go to our CSS. And we already have a thing that's saying font size, and the button's already bigger. So we're just going to put a comma here and say input. And that should make the input box bigger. Now that's a little bit bigger now. And by putting a comma in with our two selectors in CSS, that means it targets both of them when you put a comment there. If you put a space, it means the one should be a child of the other, but when you put a comma, it means it's doing both of those. So we'll do that right now, and that was pretty easy. So we made our fields a little bit bigger. You could put background colors in those fields. You can do all kinds of things, but just for now. And if you wanted to put any extra space, you could put non-breaking spaces here, because you can't just keep hitting space here. It's not going to work. It's not going to, if you look here, it's not spacing that out. So you could put non-breaking spaces if you want more room, but for now, that's fine. You could even put a margin left on these things. I didn't do this in instructions, but let's say you wanted to put a little space there. You could put margin left and just move it over a couple pixels. There's 12 pixels, and move everything over just a little bit. If you want it over more, maybe do 24. Now it's kind of moved over a little bit. So, and I just did that, and that's doing it to both the buttons and the input, so they're all lined up. So that looks okay. So again, that's the CSS. Now let's go back. Let's just check out our HTML before we start doing our JavaScript and make sure everything's okay. We want to give these IDs here, the input, because that's how we're going to identify them to get the value from them. So we're going to put IDs in here. So I'm going to put ID equals, and we'll keep it real simple. I'll just call it first, because that's the ID for the first name. And in here, I'll put ID equals last, because that's the ID for our last name. And I'm keeping it all lowercase. Even though I used uppercase here for our label, I want to keep everything lowercase. And that should be all I need right now. There's nothing inside there, so we're going to target those. And we're not doing anything else with the CSS or anything like that. So I'm going to cover that up. And keep in mind, I still have this function from the other exercise that we did, display name. So actually, that should be okay, because we are going to display name. So that function can stay there, and we can keep the same function name. So I'm going to go down here in my CSS. This is what we did last time, and everything should almost be the same. Now, we are going to make variables, but we're going to put them in here. And I just want to indicate, well, I could type them here first, but I'll show you something. I'm going to put a var, and I'm going to say var equals. And var is going to equal, and actually, I should give it a name. So I'm going to say var first. You could still call it first. And instead of just equaling a name that we give it, I'm going to copy get element. I'm going to copy this whole thing here, and then I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to say, and I forgot to copy the document. That's why it's not coloring the same. And it's going to say document.getElementById and I'm going to be getting the value from this first input. So I'll just put first in there, so I indicate that that's what I'm getting, and what I'm getting is going to be the value that people type in. So my variable first is going to basically be whatever someone types in the first input box. And then for the second one, if I copy this and I paste it, we're going to have one called last, and I'm going to target the last ID of the last box, and then when it should get the value from that. And then what we're going to do for our function, we're really going to do the same thing with the function. We're just going to display name, and we're going to take first and last. So the only thing different here is instead of just assigning a name to it right here in a JavaScript, we're going to have people type into here. Now if I type this into here, and I think on the last one, and let me save this, and if I type into here and I do, well, before I do that, let me just double check. Here's my function display name. Let me make sure that I have the onClick event, and it's called display name, exactly the same. And also make sure that I have my h2, its ID is called display. That was the same as the previous exercise. And what's going to show up here is going to be first plus a space plus last, because I use the same variable names. So everything should be okay. So if I type in Steve Austin like I used in my last exercise, when I hit display name, it should show up here. And it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because these variables have to be declared inside the function. Because the way this works, when it comes down to do this, when it runs the function, it goes through the JavaScript, it kind of gets the value of here, which is nothing to start. So by default, there's nothing here. You're already declaring that the variable is what's in here. Now when you start this, when this is refreshed, there's going to be nothing in here. So right now, right off the bat, when the JavaScript runs, it's basically saying, okay, this variable is going to be the value of that, which is going to be nothing. And it's also going to say, here's defining a display name function, which isn't being run yet. So then when I run the function, it's going to basically say, okay, take those values that you did up here. And there's no values because we didn't do anything yet. Even if you type them in, it's taking the original values. So you have to make sure that these two variables are declared at the same time when you run this function, because now you won't actually run the function. Now when you click the button, then you won't click the button until the names are in there. So let me get rid of these. I should have just cut them and pasted them. But now the way this should work, it should just be 3 lines in your function. The way this should work now is if I put Steve in here and I put Austin, now when the function runs, when I hit this button and it runs the display name function, it's going to say, okay, get the value that's in there, which is Steve, and get the value which is here, which is Austin, and display them in inner HTML, which is the H2, which should be down here. So now when I do that, that should work okay. Now it doesn't have the same margin as those, so we could move that over if we wanted to, but that's all that's really going to happen there. And you could make this anything. We did it in class. We did like college and mascot, and if you're getting sick of doing first and last name. But it's just a little example of working with form fields and taking information from these fields and passing them along. We're just passing them along onto the page, but you could pass them along to a server to fill out a form or validate a form or anything you could do with this. This is just a little start just to get used to variables. We declared variables that we just created from strings. Now this one, we created variables that actually get a value from what someone types in. So it's a little more interactive. So this was variable fields. The other one was just variable example. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to generate a random number and start to do a little bit more with a random number in our next exercise. But for now, this should be it. Make sure you save it. Make sure you gave it the right name, and then that's exercise 9b.